I was in class at the time when an announcement came over the intercom saying that we were in code red. Some students and teachers say they remember the announcement saying that it was not a drill, but I'm not really certain if that was included or not. My class locked the door, turned off the lights, and huddled in a corner. I don't remember feeling scared or the room being tense. We had a couple of code yellows early in the year for small fights in the hallway, and code yellow and code red drills weren't uncommon, so the class felt more inconvenienced by the fact that we were just about to break for lunch when the announcement was made. As we sat for longer without any update, the realization definitely began to come over the class that something more serious had happened, and we were all on our phones looking to get some idea of what was going on. This was before Twitter was super popular, and there were tons of confusion and misinfo going around from texts that people were getting from other students in the building, and from family and friends who were now watching the story develop on the news. We eventually received word that the school was going to be taken out of Code Red, and students and faculty would be released room by room and escorted out of the building by an armed police officer. We waited for what felt like hours. We'd missed lunch at that point, and the room was really restless. We finally received a knock on our door to indicate that we were leaving. The officer walked us out the back of the school and through a parking lot to a nearby church. My parents came and picked me up. They took me home, and we watched my school on the news and learned of the events that had transpired. So, here's what happened. A student that had been suspended earlier in the day returned to the school with his dad's handgun. He went into the office of the vice principal that had suspended him and opened fire. He struck and killed the vice principal. He proceeded to critically injure the head principal, who was responding to the sound of gunfire. The student then fled the school and took his own life in a parking lot not far from campus. I had learned that our vice principal had passed away from her injuries at dinner with some friends, where we just wanted to spend some time with one another. We finished our meal in silence, paid our check, and went to the school for a candlelight vigil. There had to have been around 400 plus people with candles and homemade signs. People were there just praying and speaking to the crowd. Nothing planned or officially organized, just an opportunity for people to hurt together. It sounds cliche when people say, "I never thought it would happen here," but that really is the only response that makes sense after something like that happens. I remember an intense sadness in the days that followed, and I cried more than I ever had before or since. When I think back about that day, I like to remember the kindness of the community at the candlelight vigil, and the posters and warm, kind words from neighbors and neighboring schools that lined the main hallway of the building for the next month. I was a first responder to Sandy Hook. I was a volunteer paramedic that worked 30 plus miles from the school, but I was dispatched anyway, regardless of the distance and response time, because we were up next once the local EMS crews were out of service. If I had to describe the scene, I'd say it was life-altering. I thought I had EMS stories to make your skin crawl before Sandy Hook, but now I can't even come up with anything close. The screams of parents and teachers and the other students are still burned into my mind. The visual scene, I couldn't close my eyes for weeks without seeing bodies. I'm a different person. I'm still in weekly therapy and haven't made drastic moves towards getting better. It's a part of me I'll never be able to explain to anyone that wasn't there, and I don't tell anyone that didn't know me before, because it's too much to put on anyone. I was in the Arapahoe High School shooting in 2013. The kid got kicked off the speech and debate team and decided to get revenge on the teacher. He brought a shotgun and went into the school on Friday the 13th. He fired 2 shots right off my hallway and killed a girl who died after being in a coma for a couple weeks. And then he went into the library, started a fire, and killed himself. I was in my science class right off the hallway. We were in the middle of a test, and I just wanted to get out. I was about to ask to go to the bathroom, and I decided to say, fuck it, I'll finish the test and go home. 5 minutes later, there was a gunshot. The first thing that crossed my mind was that a janitor was removing one of those giant-ass wooden doors and accidentally dropped it, slapping it against the ground. Students looked back and forth nervously, and then a second shot went off. My teacher went out into the hallway and a minute later returned to the room and told us to get into the lockdown position. I guess he saw the smoke in the stairwell and saw what happened in that hallway. Before long, we were all crammed into the corners behind the big lab tables. I was sitting in the middle of the classroom, so I was one of the last kids to get to a spot. So I was basically sitting out in the middle of the room behind a trash can. The whole time my teacher was upright next to one of the 2 doors ready to fuck up anyone that might walk in. We were in lockdown for a good 3 minutes before the announcement even happened. We sat there for a while. It felt like hours before the fire alarm went off. I'm assuming this was the fire that started in the library. Then even longer, we began hearing voices down the hallway. My teacher looked right at me in the middle of the room with a nervous look in his eyes. Finally, cops showed up. They tried the door and my teacher jumped and looked at me again, who was giving a violent nod and a thumbs up. They cleared the hallway before asking us to open the door. We all got patted down upon exiting and sat out in the cold on the track field for a couple of hours before being buzzed off to a local church. I remember texting my parents and my sister that I loved them, and funnily enough, I remember making jokes to my mom because I bet she was more scared than I was, and I was pretty fucking scared. For the rest of the month, we had a long winter break. When we all got back, things seemed normal. Everyone was closer to each other and supportive. As the year went on, things went back to normal. The usual bullying and other bullshit. So I went to online school. I remember afterwards, while we were waiting to be placed into the church, everyone was speculating who it was. They were speculating this one kid I knew and got along with pretty well had done it. He was a weird kid, but lots of fun. I remember thinking it was shitty of them to suggest it was him. All of a sudden, people were thinking it might have been him just because he wasn't treated very well in school. After school was back on, everyone had become so nice to him out of nowhere. They knew it was because they didn't want to be the next target. To any high school kids that are reading this, you know that one awkward kid that sits in your class. Don't be nice to him because you're afraid of what he'll do if he snaps. Be nice to him because we all need that in our life. After all, we're all stuck on this rock, hurtling through space, so just be fucking pleasant to one another. Start a conversation, ask about hobbies, be a good person. Hey everyone, before this video ends, I just wanted to share my final thoughts about the stories that I had just shared. These were all tragic events that never should have happened in the first place. My thoughts and prayers go out to victims, family members, and friends of anyone who suffered these tragic events. No one should have to go through something as the events transpired, let alone children. In today's society, it really seems like we're all going through a mental health crisis. So, if you know anyone who you suspect to be struggling with their mental health, just reach out to them to the best of your ability and try to help them. But obviously not all of us are qualified in handling such complex and difficult topics. So do the best you can, but in the end, just give them resources that are qualified to help them, such as BetterHelp or any other online or in-person counseling. I'll be leaving a few links to online resources that are equipped in handling mental health issues within the description down below. Again, if you know anyone or you yourself are someone who struggles with mental health, please try to use these resources to the best of your ability.